So with that, I'll give the floor to our speaker, Professor Russell Burke.
Thank you, Glenn, for the introduction. Is the mic working? Can you hear me? Great. Thanks for the invitation. I'm happy to be here. I'm especially delighted to be able to inaugurate a series on issues in higher education. I don't just mean that casually. I think that those of us involved in graduate education should be doing a better job in educating our students toward issues in the industry. Some of our faculty colleagues are more aware of them than others. We all should be. We should also be introducing graduate students, undergraduates as well, but especially graduate students, that's who I'll be speaking about today, to the range of issues that confront us in the higher education sector. They're by no means all terrible. It's not all the sky is falling. There's a lot of sky falling, but there are positive sides too, and I hope that I'll be able to emphasize both of those today. The context for my comments today have to do with the report that Glenn mentioned. I chaired the MLA task force on the future of the PhD in the language and literature field. So MLA is the organization, you know, of scholars, independent scholars, graduate students, a whole range of ranks in English and in the foreign languages. And I was president of the MLA in 2011. That means that I was on the executive council as of 2008, that horrible year, 2008, when the market crashed and never has it recovered. So there's been a lot of thinking about what we should do. One response that came up immediately was, well, the market is half the size before, therefore we should drop PhD production by half. Right? So close half the departments or reduce your cohorts by half. This didn't seem right to me. It doesn't seem right to me. I'm going to try to explain why it's a wrong way to go, but it doesn't mean that it's business as usual. On the contrary, we have to adjust to the new challenges and the new opportunities that we face in the world of humanities and higher education as it's being transformed today. So I proceed from the assumption of the absolute importance of doctoral education. That's my main focus. Master's is a somewhat different discussion, but it's part of that. Why do we do this at all? I think it contributes to the social good. I think it's good for there to be people who have had the experience of gaining skills of deep research, which is what defines the PhD ultimately. Also, the particular skills associated, the particular kind of knowledge associated with the humanities, that sort of skepticism about language, etc. I won't belabor that. I think it's good that there are a lot of people in society who have those abilities. Actually, the number of PhDs in the US isn't particularly impressive. We're about in the middle of the range of OECD countries. I think we could probably have more PhDs and more PhDs in the humanities in the country. Secondly, I think it's crucial not only in the macro but in the micro level for the individual student. Who should go into a PhD program, especially in the humanities? Only someone who is passionate about the intellectual project of that field. That's the entry ticket. Don't do it in order to get a job. You do it because you're passionate about French literature or German poetry or about Chinese art or et cetera, et cetera. You just didn't get enough of it as an undergrad. You didn't get enough of it as and you want to go deep and you want to go long. If you don't have that in your heart, then you're in the wrong place. But if you do have it, and you're like 98% of the other students, you're doing it at a time when you also have to be thinking very seriously about your livelihood. And it's this mixture of intellectual passion and career necessity that complicates the world of graduate education. There's a third reason why I'm a promoter of doctoral education in the humanities, and that's because it's really an indispensable part of what we mean by a university, but a research university. You could imagine universities without the humanities at all, just technical schools. And you could imagine them without graduate education too, but they'd be a very, very different creature than what we have. I think the sciences, the natural sciences, would be impoverished if the humanities were to disappear, and if the humanities were to lose that resonance of the graduate education generates, we'd be much poorer. So let's keep in mind, yes, we want to promote this, but we face some challenges. Challenges I'm going to talk about have been talked about for a while. Some are not new. In many ways, we're in a new situation. Some of the changes that I'm going to talk about in this discussion are negative, are unfortunate when we wish they were otherwise, but we have to face them. But some have to do with some real positive opportunities in terms of transformations of our culture these days, so we should think about that too. But you're going to get the bad news first, okay? I think we've reached a tipping point. Reached a tipping point with the 2008 collapse of the academic job market. I'll show you some data on that in a second, but this is just indisputable. This is amplified by growing awareness of the student debt crisis. One way or another, education is costly, even in situations where students benefit from support from the university, in the form of fellowships. It's a cost. It's a cost to the institution, but it's a cost to students as well. It's a cost in terms of delayed entry into the job market, often delayed beginning of families, a kind of existential cost as well. So let's not pretend that this is free in any way at all. We should be very, very careful with how we use the resources. Particularly because at the end of that going long, if you're thinking that your only outcome is to become a college professor, well, there's this bad trick that's being played on you, and that's called the casualization of the academic workforce. More and more of the jobs available are not on the tenure track, and the working conditions are not particularly attractive in many situations. I'll have more to say to that in the course of the presentation, and that's linked to the time to degree issue. People take an awful long time to finish humanities degrees, and we, especially we humanities faculty, have to think very carefully as to why we're asking students to take so long, because we're the ones who are designing these programs, and we're the ones who are providing the education. And yes, there are other kinds of pressures on time to degree, but ultimately it's on us to think about how we structure our programs. So this is the data about jobs in English. I'm going to do English and Spanish, just as the two big fields in the language area. The blue line on top are all ads in the job information list, which is published by the MLA and is probably the best indicator of jobs available in the country. It's not perfect. The more you try to look for the statistics that really clinch your case, you discover how squishy statistics are. JIL doesn't cover all those jobs where there aren't national searches. So community colleges that aren't searching nationally wouldn't show up here. Nonetheless, this is the big game, if you will. What is that? Avocado-colored line is those from the blue, those that are tagged as tenure track. Okay, and you have the red in the middle, which is a flat or in fact somewhat increasing number of PhD recipients in English. The decline is 2008, where the job market just shrunk enormously. The difference between the red line and the green line is the difference between the positions available for new PhDs coming on the market and the availability of tenure track positions. So you see that in the prior period it was actually relatively in sync, except it didn't even feel good then, and it didn't feel good then because this is a bird's eye view, and there may be jobs in English, but you do Victorian, and there are no jobs in Victorian because all the jobs are in some other, in some other subfield. Plus, the perpetual roulette wheel of the job market, which is that your subfield may or may not do well the year that you happen to go in the job market. If you could wait 5 years, maybe it'd be better, but that's not the way our lives are organized. Here's the same story for Spanish. It's really not any different. That big drop after 2008 and the red line passing the green line. This is an interesting one that takes a little bit of time to wrap your head around it. So these are different sectors. On the left is humanities, life sciences, physical sciences, social sciences. The colored bars, those are years. So this is the cohort that finishes in 1961 to 65, and this is the cohort that finishes 2006 to 2010. Okay, and the comparison is the percentage of PhDs completing in 6 years or less. We have another set of slides for completing in 10 years or less, etc. But this is the real relevant one, because I think most people would agree that you want to get done in 6 years or less. The MLA report ultimately recommends completable in 5, but I think this is a reasonable ballpark. So this is something for us to think about. In the 60s, 25% of humanities PhDs completed in 6 years or less. Indeed, by 70 it was even somewhat higher, and now it's 10%. 10% complete in 6 years or less. Let that sink in. Okay? That alone, is worth thinking about. But then, these guys are giving out PhDs as well. I mean, it's the same degree. It's the same currency. Right? Life sciences, 33% about. Physical sciences, 40% in 6 years or less. Social sciences, 28%. What's going wrong with us? Now, I think there's a complex set of answers. I think part of it could be that intellectual labor is organized differently. Physical sciences, you're in the lab. We cultivate loneliness. I do think there is something. I didn't mean that joke was supposed to come a few sentences later. I do think there's something important about individual focus in the humanities, but I think we may overemphasize it. That cultivation of individual intellectuality doesn't have to turn into solitary confinement. And when we're left on our own, or when we leave our graduate students on their own, or when we leave it up to the graduate students to seek us out, rather than having some expectation, things get, the flow of progress gets impeded. So I think that's part of it. I don't mean to demean the point that we in the humanities have other kinds of tasks, sometimes having to learn difficult languages, having to spend time in archives. But, faculty colleagues, let us just dwell on this, that elsewhere in the university, people can get a PhD much more rapidly than with us. That is to say, to the extent that we are responsible for that longer time, we're responsible for those greater costs to the institution or greater costs to our students. This is placements. The blue at the top is the tenure track appointment placements, and so after 2008, the placements in tenure track declines rapidly, and here we have more placements in non-tenure track appointments. We'll see the same thing for Spanish. The bottom, you have it's a little bit of insider baseball. This is that tan is outside of higher education, a significant portion. The purple is academic administration, so staying within the university but not as faculty. The interesting datum here is the rise of the red, and that is postdocs. And I think this is an important other discussion to be had, that There's this development of the postdoc position in the humanities now as a place to go after you get your PhD. We should be wary of this. If you've just received your PhD and you get a postdoc, great, right? Good luck, congratulations, right? You're set for a year or 2 or 3, depending what it is. But we, as a sector, should be wary of this. The life sciences are full of postdocs. And it's become, in fact, obligatory to get postdocs. Indeed, it's become obligatory to get several postdocs, and they talk about it as the postdoc trap. And so you spend your 5 or 6 or 7 years getting your PhD, and then look forward to a future where you have to get 1 or 2 or 3 serial postdocs. So then you're looking at going on that miserable job market in your late 30s. This is not a pretty picture. So on the individual level, the postdoc's great. As a long-term development, I don't believe that it's salutary for the humanities. Therefore, I think we should also think about that when we're on hiring committees. I don't think you want to discriminate against someone who has a postdoc, but if you have a fresh PhD and a postdoc side by side, don't measure them equally. Don't expect that fresh PhD to have the same publications that the postdoc has achieved. Anyhow, again, the same story here for for the languages. Oops. Where did I go? Yeah, I just thought I'd give you this. This is absolutely. Well, not absolutely, somewhat random data. I was sitting on in our graduation ceremony last June, and the way we do it in our foreign languages department is that each PhD is called up. A few words are said about his or her dissertation, and then an announcement is made as to where they're going to go. So we had 15 PhDs at that point. This is French, German, Spanish, etc. And at that point, there were 14 firm placements. Of those, right, so this is Stanford, pretty good reputation, 2 tenure track placements, 14% are going to tenure track jobs. So I think we as an industry should also become more honest about our statistics, and on a department level, school level, etc. We had 8 non-tenure track, and of those, a significant portion were basically picking up gigs at Stanford to teach a year of French or teach a year of Spanish or something like that. One got a multi-year job at an institution in Hong Kong, not tenure track, but nonetheless teaching. And I think as we advise our students about what kind of career possibilities are out there, we should become more cognizant of institutions in East Asia, but also in the Middle East that are hiring American PhDs in the humanities. And I think it's a good thing that they want to develop liberal arts education. I don't think we know enough there about the conditions of academic labor. But what was really interesting is this. Oops. 4 were going into the private sector. Humanities PhDs, right? They wrote their dissertation on 17th century French poetry or medieval Spanish, and nearly 30% were getting jobs in the private sector. And these are their titles: Chief Content Officer, Partner Operations, Digital Marketing Manager, Content Specialist for the Trust and Safety Operations Team. That is, they're all going into the IT industry. They're going into the IT industry on the soft side. They weren't going in there to be programmers. They've got plenty of programmers. But they also need content. They need to develop material with which the IT companies can reach a public that is not composed exclusively of engineering students. We've had a lot of discussion at Stanford between humanities and Silicon Valley to explore job opportunities for humanities PhDs in the IT industry. At first, Silicon Valley was very skeptical, as were we, but we had a couple of meetings, a couple of conferences, and some bridges were built. I can't say that all skepticism has disappeared. In parts of the humanities, there remains an enormous economist bias against the private sector, period, end of the story. In parts of the industry world, there's a sense that humanists can be arrogant and self-enclosed, but there's an intersection. There's an intersection where there are productive discussions going on. I'll share that one criticism of humanities education that we heard from Silicon Valley relates to a topic that was referred to before, and that is the capacity to collaborate. We cultivate lonely work. Lonely work can be a good thing, but it's not the only way to work. And we should, and in fact, we already do collaborate. You can think of our seminars as a kind of collaborative learning environment, but we should reflect on that. We need to introduce a metacognitive element into our already existing collaboration so that students who go onto the job market can say, you know what, I can work in the library, but I can also work in a team. Anyhow, this is remarkable. Twice as many people were going into the private sector than were getting tenure track. Not learning how to do this. We're going backwards? Yes. Okay, so up to now, it's sort of the negative side. I think we should be cognizant of some positive developments. We have opportunities to respond to new potentials. What do these include? There are new forms of collaboration and communication already developing within parts of the humanities, especially people who work in digital humanities talk about this, but I think that's spilling over into other fields. There is greater attention paid to technology in higher education, even if I'm pretty clumsy with this right now. I think particularly interesting is the extent to which the public is interested in issues of education. The public at large is very worried about what students are getting out of college. High costs, you know, what's the outcome? It doesn't prepare them for a specific job. I think there's a strong argument to make in reply to that doubt. I'm sure you all know what it is. I'm not going to repeat it. But nonetheless, there's that the public is watching what we do. One effect of that is the assessment movement in K through 12, but also through accreditation processes in higher education as well. I think that accreditation often comes at us in really clumsy and impalatable ways, but that's not a reason to reject the whole notion of assessment. I don't think it's unfair to be asked, how do you know you're succeeding in education? But we should be the ones who set the terms of answering that rather than leaving it up to others. Those are opportunities for us to change. Now we come to the MLA report. We began with these core principles. In PhD education, we want to have continue to maintain the goal of excellence, but excellence can be achieved in different ways, in non-conventional ways. We also want to maintain, we want to expand, it's better, accessibility in higher education. And this is really a crucial point in the response to the argument that we should slash higher PhD programs in order to match the job market. There's been some progress made in diversifying the pipeline, in achieving greater diversity in PhD programs. Not enough. I am certain that if we were to close half the PhD programs to match a halved job market, diversity would suffer enormously. Our goal should be to maintain access to higher education, to advanced study, to those students who are qualified and have that passion that I talked about before. We have to keep those doors open. We have to make ourselves available for all the reasons that I enumerated at the beginning. But we also have to respond to the changed circumstances, which includes recognizing, third bullet point, that not everybody is going to become a university professor. People are going to go into other parts of the educational sector. Some people are going to leave the education sector too, and it's not bad. Right? People can find satisfying, profitable, fulfilling careers outside of higher education, as hard as it may be for professors to conceive this. And in fact, students have already been doing this for a long time. We just don't talk about it in the humanities. In the humanities, we don't talk about it. If you go to the chemistry department, they'll say people have been going to industry forever. If you go to statistics, they'll say people have been going to government forever. If you go to most of the university, it's the norm for graduates to go on to do many things, not just go on to become professors. It's only in a part of the humanities where there's been this primary focus on reproducing the professoriate. Yes, we should reproduce the professoriate, but not all of our students are going to do that. And that's what we need to have frank discussions about this. And that means focusing on graduate students' needs. We should remember that graduate education is about education for graduate students. It's not about promoting my research agenda. I have plenty of opportunities to do that. I can go to conferences, I can write articles, I can write books on my stuff. I can teach it as well, but I should teach it in ways that are productive for graduate students rather than productive for me. We should schedule courses, we should structure programs in ways that are productive for graduate students rather than for us. We should have paracurricular opportunities in universities, I suppose, like this speaker series, which provide graduate students access to training, to preparation, to career formation that will help them succeed in that broadened, in that world of broadened career paths. And these are some of the recommendations. The Yanalay report doesn't have a one-size-fits-all. Institutions in the United States are just way too diverse for us to do that. Disciplines are diverse. What people expect in Slavic is radically different from what people expect in Spanish, even if deans don't understand that. But these are principles. We've asked departments to redesign their doctoral programs by examining the form and pacing of coursework, how much, what's the nature of coursework. In our world at Stanford, in the past, students would take several seminars at the same time. They'd have to write their research paper in all those seminars at the same time, pretty much due in the same week. We've moved more to a model where students are taking seminars parallel, but in one they write the research paper, and in others they do other kinds of activities. Paracurriculum I've already talked about. Modes of evaluation, is it only on the basis of the paper that they get evaluated? Can it be in terms of their oral presentation? Can it be in terms of the other kinds of skills that we hope them to develop? Qualifying exams. Well, qualifying and comprehensive exams, I should say. Whatever the examination structure is, we found that these can hold up student progress significantly. At the very least, if departments are going to have examination expectations, they should offer a curriculum that prepares students for the examination. I think that's a bottom line. If we're not prepared to offer the courses, then it shouldn't be on the exam. And that means some infringement on the notion of absolute latitude on the part of faculty to offer what they want to teach. But if you admit a graduate student to your program, you're entering into a set of obligations. The alternative would be to say, you know what? I don't want to teach that material because it's no longer important in the field. That's fine if that's your view of the discipline, but then take it off the examination list. And then a similar thinking through of exactly what's expected at the prospectus level. Clarification of expectations, I think, would go a long way to allow students just to plan their work rationally. We'd like programs to have across the board a greater engagement with technology. This doesn't mean that we're expecting everybody to become a digital humanities expert, although I think more and more students will want to involve themselves significantly with digital humanities. But there's a level of technology literacy which I can't define that I think we should work toward as an across-the-board expectation. To the extent that some of our PhD recipients will indeed go on to become teachers of undergraduates, those undergraduates are going to be technologically savvy. Their faculty should at least be able to keep up with them and understand how technology can be deployed in learning processes, which is something that holds both for those who go on to be teachers, professors, and those who go on to careers outside of education. We've asked departments, we've asked the profession to rethink what we mean by the dissertation. We found that most departments, in fact, don't even define what the dissertation is. So part of this is just making clear what expectations would be so that graduate students have some kind of guidance as to what should be achieved. But the background default option is that the dissertation is the draft of your first book, that it's 200, 300, 400 pages on a narrow topic. I don't mean to demean that. For some students, that might really be the right thing to do. But if a student in year 2, 3, or 4 of the graduate program, of the doctoral program, is figuring out that a research professorship career is not for him or her, and that the goal is something else, such as a teaching institution, or even high school education, or even stepping outside of the education sector, well, maybe the dissertation can have a different character. There should be a final major work. But if you're going to go into a teaching career, maybe the dissertation would have a pedagogical character. Maybe it would go at a work of literature with a kind of didactic perspective. Maybe it could be a translation for those who are interested in translation studies. Maybe it could be directed toward some topical area relevant to government or not-for-profit service, if that's the goal that the student is imagining in that broadened career track. Now, people will say, broadened career tracks, my dean only counts people we place in tenure track positions. I think we have to argue and push back against that. I think if we place students in tenure track positions, that's great, and they need maybe that traditional dissertation. But if a student has decided that, you know what, I'm passionate about teaching, I'm glad that I had 5 years to really get deeply into French literature, but I want to teach in inner city schools, that should be regarded as a good placement and not as a bad placement. And I think we have the moral high ground to make that kind of argument. But at the same time, if they want to say, I'm glad that I had 5 years to go into Spanish literature, and I want to go into IT, or I want to go elsewhere into the private sector, we should tell the dean that that too should be as respected as someone from chemistry who goes into private industry. Time to degree. So this is a touchy topic. We phrase this in a way that it is a challenge to departments primarily rather than to students. It's about designing the course of study, designing the program in a way that can be completable within 5 years. That's the investment of time that we think departments should reasonably ask of students. Some students may need longer. There are always personal circumstances that come into play. There's the issue of sufficient funding, and we don't make a statement on what that funding should be, except that it should be sufficient to allow the program to be completed within 5 years. The median of time to degree from beginning of graduate education to the end, according to the MLA analysis of the survey of earned doctorates, is around 9 years in our fields. Now, the American Academy has just run a study that looked at the numbers a little bit differently, and they come up with a median of 7 years. I think part of the difference is that they look specifically at the last degree you received and when you entered that program, as opposed to the MLA, which looks at when you entered graduate school, any graduate school, and when you finished graduate school. So the MLA is picking up the MA that you got at another institution, for example. In any case, what the MLA found in terms of time in graduate school, if you thought 9 was bad, 40% of degree recipients are taking more than 10 years. those are not the people who are likely to get tenure-track jobs either. The evidence on this is squishy, but it seems that if the longer you take, the less likely you're going to be on the job market. That sounds brutal, but it seems to be what the evidence points to. I think part of this is also a function. Well, it's a function of better design of the programs. That was the first recommendation, but also more effective mentoring, more effective advising. And we can talk about that later when we get through these. Teaching preparation. If the argument is that many students will not go on to become teachers in higher education, but will go into other positions in higher education, so-called alt-ac, or are going to leave the education sector at all, why prepare them to be teachers? And the answer is that of the many transferable skills you get in graduate education, the capacity to teach, the capacity to stand up in front of a room and understand, are people understanding what I'm saying? Are they getting it? How do I restructure my message? You can use this in the private sector just as well as you can use it in the classroom. So I think we need not less teacher preparation, but better teacher preparation. The tough thing here is that I believe in many public institutions, graduate students are in effect exploited by receiving insufficient funding. Therefore, they're perpetually TAing in order to meet the institution's teaching needs. That's an abuse of graduate students, I think. There should be sufficient teaching in a program to support the graduate students' professional training, but to the extent that there's more de facto required teaching, the institution should hire regular staff to teach those courses. At the same time, we have the opposite problem in many of the private institutions, where I think there's been a race to the bottom to reduce the amount of teaching that graduate students at places like Stanford or Princeton or NYU do. Part of that is because there's a perception that graduate student study applicants will go to the place where you have to teach the least, and there's just so much wrong with that picture that I won't even begin to pick it apart. But also there's a labor market issue here too, that some of the reduction of minimization of graduate student teaching has been a way to avoid the unionization effort has taken place at some institutions, private and public. Expand professionalization opportunities. Graduate students are going to go on to become academics or many other things. There are different kinds of skills that aren't the regular stuff of humanities seminars. Those humanities seminars are precious, and we should continue having those, but our students have to be able to acquire these other skills as well. Project management skills, speaking skills, writing skills, a certain degree of, a certain degree of numeracy, the ability, even for those of our students who go on into the academy, and we want them to succeed, and we want them to be department chairs sometime, they have to be able to read budgets, they have to be able to make those arguments. We should have not lengthy courses, but weekend seminars on the amount of math you need to be able to do that. We can't do that ourselves, we in the faculty, in the departments, but luckily we're not an island unto ourselves. We're in the middle of a university where there are lots of other people who have lots of other skills. I can't teach my graduate students how to become more proficient in technology, but I know that there are plenty of people in the library and elsewhere who can help them. Many of those people who can help them professionalize, in fact, are us. That is to say, they received PhDs. They're people with strong academic backgrounds and strong academic values who are working in universities in alt-ac, alternative academic careers, and have a lot to offer our graduate students. So I think part of the reform has to be to understand that graduate education shouldn't be owned narrowly by the department, but should build on partnerships with other units in the university. The Director of Graduate Study, the faculty member in a department who is vested with overseeing graduate students should be the one who promotes this change, and to the extent that there's a placement officer, a single graduate faculty member who is charged with shepherding degree recipients onto the job market, that person's going to have to learn a whole lot of new skills. And they begin with building bridges to the Career Development Center, but also learning where your alumni are and learning about the rest of the job market that graduate students really face. Our responsibility as a department should not just be for those who go on into the academy. And, well, therefore, we have to validate these diverse career outcomes. Throughout the process, we heard again and again the narrative that graduate students circulate that they're interested in becoming something other than a professor. They'll go to the Career Development Center to get information, but they insist on absolute confidentiality because they're very afraid that their advisor or the department will find out. We heard stories where the advisor found out and then dropped the student. I don't know if that really happens. I don't know if that happens often. I do know that that is part of contemporary graduate student culture. The sense that a department might drop them de facto, if not financially, if they're discovered to be looking for other kinds of career paths. We have to break through this family romance in the humanities and understand that it's okay to do anything, and we should be proud of successful placements no matter what sector our students go into. And therefore, we should be maybe ready to rethink how broadly we admit if we're not only training future professors. That is, graduate applications shouldn't be scanned to weed out those who might not be absolutely committed to becoming professors. I want to come to the conclusion, and I want to just highlight a few points of controversy that the report has elicited. And I wrote about these in Inside Higher Education in the summer. There are critics who continue to argue for cutting the size of PhD cohorts. I'll call that. There are critics who will argue for reducing accessibility. Those two things are exactly the same, right? So let's not pretend that that wouldn't be the outcome. My argument there is that their argument is specious. Their argument is that if we produce fewer PhDs, then there'll be a shift in the supply and demand. Everybody will get a good job, and because there are too few of us, our salaries are going to go up. This is just wrong. If there are fewer PhDs, the more likely outcome is that there will be fewer there'll be fewer graduate faculty lines warranted by administrations, and the status of the humanities within the institution is just going to shrink. So it'll be self-defeating. Their argument is a kind of a guild protectionism. It may have worked for the AMA, but it's not going to work for us. Then there are those who defend the long time to degree as necessary. I'm prepared to take that outside. And the same here. The insistence that PhD is only for professorships. That's an illusion that is out there. I think all of this can happen. All of these reforms can happen on the basis of the response that the report has received, despite some of that nasty clamor in the comments section in the higher education press along the lines of the criticism that I just went through. The job market changes are there, and they're not going to go away. By the job market changes, I don't just mean the shrinking of the job market, but the casualization of the academic workforce. One figure is that 70 or 75% of the instructors in higher education are now off the tenure track. I'll accept that figure. I'm not sure exactly how it's calculated, but it seems to be disseminated wide. So only 25% are on the tenure track. To change that, to go, I call it the high road of imagining only tenure track instruction, we'd have to add, what? Triple the number of tenure track positions across the country in the humanities. I just don't see this happening. That's a utopian vision that pursuing which is just going to deflect us from the real challenges and the real solutions that we might face. A lot of these reforms are already underway. If you look at the MLA report, which is on the MLA website, there's an appendix with statements from, I think, about 14 or 15 departments, English, foreign languages, where they're doing stuff like this, where they've revised their programs, where they're trying to get students through more effectively, where they're thinking about broader career preparation. Time to degree is slightly down. It seems to have peaked, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. It was a bit of a downward move. I think all of this complaining about it has had some effect. But in the end, we need leadership and we need dedication, and it's a call in particular for the faculty to take this up. There's responsibility on the graduate student side, to be sure, but the report is directed above all to the departments and their faculty members to rethink what kind of invitation they're extending to new graduate students they've been. Thank you.